Okay, very good day to one and all. In this episode of Growing a Tree of Prosperity, I'm going to start to come up with a number of videos. And this came from a request from a reader on my blog, a good friend, and someone who follows this YouTube channel. And he thought he wanted me to share some of my thoughts on intergenerational finance. And for this episode, which is the first episode which I'm going to do, and there will be a series of episodes on this issue, I'll be talking about an approach on passing wealth to future generations. All right. And I hope that this would be useful for parents who are thinking about how to plan their legacy. Okay. And and for this particular episode, I'm just going to start by just sharing a little bit on my philosophy, right, on how I view this problem of intergenerational wealth transfer. Okay. And I like to say that I'm definitely not an expert in these. And these are my thoughts. I don't want to be bound by them. I don't want my son to one day follow this video and say, Dad, you said this on your video. Now I expect you to do this. Okay. All right. So I have started reading a few books on how to make your kid a money genius, uh, and some books on making your children more financially savvy. Okay, I will be spending the next few videos contextualizing the material for the Singapore audience. I can't finish the book and do the video. I probably will finish one or two chapters, and then I'll talk about what I've learned from each of these chapters. Okay, so for this first episode, I'm not going to talk about any book for now. I'm just talking about where I stand philosophically. Okay, and hopefully by the end of reading a number of books on this topic, maybe my mind would have changed. All right, so I'm keeping an open mind. This is just a starter video, and remember that I'm not acting as a guru. I'm not an expert. I welcome any views from parents. If you violently disagree with me over what I've said, that's totally fine. It's just fine to just share your disagreement and have a good conversation going, right? Because I'm also learning from you when you comment on this channel. Okay. So there are two general approaches that I've noticed from Singapore parents, especially those who are more financially savvy, and maybe they also are financial influencers or bloggers. Okay. And the first approach is the tough love approach, right? I develop grit and resilience, and my child should learn how to support themselves. Okay, I think a majority of financial influencers, I think my partner, Dr. Wealth, also believes in the first approach. Okay, and the second approach is that actually my child needs some financial support so that I can smoothen out their life path for them. Okay, but I don't want to do it such that it engenders a crutch mentality. If I give my kid money and they end up getting spoiled, then I would have failed as a parent. So that's a second approach. Okay, and I noticed that the second approach, generally the people that do that are wealthier, obviously, right? And you're just trying to manage your children's lives. Okay, so let's talk about how each approach works. So the first approach, which I term develop grit, and the majority of parents support this approach, is generally speaking, the child gets support up to their first degree. Okay, so if you study, you complete your A levels or poly, and then you go get your degree, there is some kind of support right up to the first degree, and then that's it, right? When you start work, you should be on your own. Okay, uh, of course, the child still gets free rental if they stay with their parents, or the child moves out only after their BTO arrives. So they probably get free rental for, in most cases, longer than 5 years, because a son graduates at 25. These days they get married to 32, 33 years old. So still very good support, right? Free rental for 8 years. The idea is that the child can support themselves financially and fend for themselves. Okay. And so these people want to teach self-reliance, they want to teach independence, but also generally financial literacy is picked up by the child on their own, because the child would have to maybe fend for themselves, have a conversation with their classmates who become financial advisors, and maybe read some books. Okay, so that's the first approach. All right. Okay. Now let's talk about the second approach. The second approach is willing to give some financial support beyond the first degree, and a small minority of wealthy parents choose this path. So the child either gets a starter portfolio, which is very rare, but several very wealthy parents have given the CPF injection, right? Which means that the money goes into the CPF. The child can't touch it until much later in life, but you notice that they have a lot of money, right? To maybe buy a starter home, uh, to support their own kids, and to buy an NOT when they hit 65 years old. Okay. Some other wealthy parents will give their child support for their first home upon getting married, right? And some really wealthy parents can invest in their child's startup company. Okay. And the idea is that competition is actually getting much tougher at the high end. So children should get some financial support. They can do better in life. But this is frowned upon by the prevailing financial literature because books like The Millionaire Next Door, they call this economic outpatient care, and they warn that this can lead to a crutch mentality. Okay, so you need to understand the risk behind giving financial support. Okay, so which one do I choose? All right, now for me, I prefer the second path. Okay, and these are my personal reasons for doing that. Just make sure that you understand that this is I'm not recommending this for you. I'm saying that this is the current approach that I think works for me. Okay, I prefer to give financial support because I notice as my kids are growing up, they're not very material. Okay, they don't really want things. I have consistently given them money when they go out and they come back empty-handed. Okay, and so I guess maybe some of my values or my genes have rubbed off on them. Okay, so spending a lot of money, frittering the money away is fairly slim in that case. Unless maybe they start dating the wrong kind of person, right? Then maybe my view would change. But right now, I think both my kids are like that. Okay, another reason is I'm not sure whether the way we are investing in higher education, it can lead to stable employment thanks to developments in AI. And this is something which I think nobody knows the right answer. Okay, one school of thought is that um, if you uh, if you find it harder to get a job after getting a degree, then maybe you should have gone for a skill set instead, right? Like maybe learn plumbing or become an electrician. Okay. Um, and the final reason, which is I think the strongest reason, is that if my kids have to wait for me to die to get my money, because of longer lifespans, they will get their money very late, right? What is the point of inheriting money in your 60s? You can't enjoy it, you can't make the money do well. And if they live longer, it will just become a bigger problem for my grandkids, right? So I think I really want to pass on a little bit earlier than to pass a lot at a very late stage. All right. Okay. So this is why I prefer the second approach to give financial support. But financial support has to be conditional. So for me, how I'm thinking about financial support is at age 18, the moment my daughter and my son is able to start the CDP account, I build a 6-digit starter portfolio, focus on Singapore, focus on dividends, right? But they have to promise me that they can only spend the dividends, right? They can monitor the portfolio, they can spend the dividends, and they can't turn over the portfolio until they get better training. Okay, so I will also have planned a series of top-ups when they reach certain milestones as adults. All right, so one of the milestones is when you graduate with a useful local degree. Now, I'm not highlighting what a useful local degree is because for my children's generation, I really don't know what they are. What kind of local degrees can actually lead to employment? I don't know. Okay, and it might sound offensive to some of the listeners. If I were to look at the degrees today, right, I wouldn't encourage my kids to study a humanities degree. Now, of course, this is a conversation between the parent and child, right? Just because I'm against the humanities doesn't mean that I wouldn't give a top up. Now, maybe if my daughter wants to study English literature, but she said, Dad, I'm sensible, I will sign up with NIE once I graduate and say, hey, that seems like very stable employment. I will give her the top up, right? Yeah. So it doesn't mean that I'm biased. I just want an assurance that you are not studying something for fun, all right? Because it hurts the family finances when I dump money on the degree, and there has to be a reasonable return on investment, not just for me, but also for my kid who's studying for that degree, right? And I'm not a believer in this idea of doing something you're passionate about, all right? So I'm not pinpointing what a useful local degree is, because in the future, it's all up in the air. For all you know, the philosophers, the historians, and the English literature majors are getting very better employment than engineers in the future. Then the argument that useful local degree would therefore lie with the humanities. All right, so please don't beat me up. All right. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is that I will plan a fairly substantial payout if they get milestones for the CFA exams. And this is something that I've spoken to a lot of people about. I personally, it took me 19 years to get my charter because of the working experience requirement. But it is the number one thing that's helped me in my life, because whenever I have a disagreement with a financial advisor or anyone, I can go back to first principles. And the first principles came from the rigorous 3 years studying the CFA exams night after night. All right. And I know that there is a certain number of people in this crowd that says that it doesn't lead to employment, or it's just a 棒sai zua, all right. But it's benefited me a lot, okay, and I credit my 5-digit passive income to basically sticking to the chartered financial analyst exams, reading the financial analyst journals, and then tuning out all that bullshit, right, that comes out on the web. So for every level of the CFA exams, as well as level 0, which is the foundations exam, I will plan a fairly large payout for that, higher than the local degree. Okay, so how much it depends on how my portfolio does. Okay, and finally, this might piss off some people. Zero support for matrimonial home. Okay, it is not a question of whether I love my children or I love their spouses. Okay, if I put money into my child's matrimonial home, it becomes matrimonial property. It can be split up in the event of a divorce, even if I pay for the bulk of it. All right, so I'm not doing that. I'm putting all the wealth into likely a CDP account, because it's harder, it's more illiquid, right? Harder to mess with it. Okay, and my children can use the payout to support their future mortgages. Okay, so this is my current stand. Okay, if the regulations change, obviously, the kind of support that I will give will also change. And that's basically all I have. Okay, I'm just explaining to everybody my top-down approach towards intergenerational wealth transfer. You can agree with me, you can disagree with me, we'll talk about it in the comment. I'm obviously not trying to impose my views on you. Okay, and you can tell that, maybe I'm a little bit old school, you can accuse me for being a boomer. Okay, and if you study the humanities, you might be offended. But if the current batch of graduates could get a better job, they have better life outcomes for Gen X, I'm willing to change my mind, right? But I'm not seeing it. I'm just not seeing an inspiring lifestyle from my peers who studied the humanities. Of course, there are plenty of exceptions, right? The PPE people are doing very well, right? And I don't consider law part of the humanities bucket anyway. So if my kids are very good at writing essays and they get a law degree and all that, expect a chunk of reward coming from daddy when you get a law degree. All right, I have first-hand experience on how difficult a law degree is. Okay, so if you like my content, subscribe to my channel, right? You want to listen to how my life story goes, Google ERM intro, take the first link, and I'll catch you on the next video. And we will dive deeper into how to make your kids financially more savvy. All right, thank you very much.